The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through stars, planets, and the space between. But what happens when something arrives that answers to no mystical force, only to the fundamental laws of a different universe entirely? The Imperial Star Destroyer Adjudicator hung in orbit above Lothal, a dagger of gray metal against the planet's brown and green surface. Inside the bridge, Captain Veshek reviewed supply requisitions with the enthusiasm of a man counting grains of sand. The outer rim was a backwater posting, punishment for some forgotten failure. Nothing ever happened here. Then every metal surface in the bridge began to hum. "Captain?" Lieutenant Oresco's voice carried an edge of concern. "Sensors are detecting a spatial anomaly at bearing 27 Mark III. "Clarify," Veshek said, straightening in his command chair. "Sir, it's—" Oresco's voice died. Through the viewport, space itself seemed to tear. Not the familiar blue tunnel of hyperspace, but something else entirely. Reality rippled like disturbed water, and through that impossible wound in the universe, something fell. A man. He tumbled through the void, surrounded by arcing energy that looked nothing like any technology in Imperial records. His cape, yes, a cape, billowed around him as he hung suspended in vacuum, somehow alive, somehow conscious. Then the metal debris around him began to move. Durasteel fragments from his passage through dimensions gathered around the figure, forming a protective sphere. The man raised both hands, and the sphere became a vessel. He wasn't falling anymore. He was flying. "All batteries, open fire!" Veshek commanded. Turbolaser batteries unleashed Emerald Fury. The bolts should have vaporized the target instantly. Instead, they curved. The energy blasts bent around the man like water around stone, dissipating harmlessly into space. "Impossible," Oresco whispered. The figure accelerated toward the Star Destroyer, not toward the hangar bay, toward the hull itself. "Deflector shields at maximum!" Veshek shouted. "Deploy TIE fighters! All hands to—" The Adjudicator shuddered. Metal groaned with a sound that shouldn't exist in the vacuum of space, transmitted through the ship's frame directly into the bones of every crew member aboard. On the viewport, a section of the Star Destroyer's hull began to peel away like the skin of a fruit. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, someone screamed. "Structural integrity failing. The metal itself is tearing apart." The man passed through the wound he'd created in the ship's armor, and suddenly artificial gravity and atmosphere surrounded him. He floated gently down to Deck 9, boots touching metal grating with barely a sound. Around him, emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trapping him in a corridor with a dozen stormtroopers who'd been rushing to the breach. "Halt!" the squad leader commanded, raising his E-11 blaster rifle. "Identify yourself!" The man was perhaps 60 years old, his face weathered and hard. He wore strange clothing, a dark suit beneath a deep red cape, and an unusual helmet of alien design. But his eyes held something that made the stormtrooper's finger hesitate on the trigger. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen empires rise and fall, who'd survived horrors these soldiers couldn't imagine. "I am Magneto," the man said, his voice carrying an accent the stormtroopers couldn't place. "And you are soldiers of an empire." His expression darkened. "I know your kind very well. Open fire!" 12 blaster bolts erupted from 12 rifles. None reached their target. The bolts hung suspended in the air, frozen in crackling spheres of red energy. With a slight gesture, Magneto sent them careening into the walls, scoring black marks across pristine Imperial metal. Then he raised his hands, and the stormtroopers discovered that their armor, their protection, their identity, belonged to him now. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The troopers lifted off the deck, limbs flailing uselessly as invisible hands of magnetism seized the metal components of their armor. They hung suspended like grotesque puppets, weapons clattering to the floor. Magneto studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Tell your superiors," he said quietly, "that someone new has arrived in your galaxy. Someone who will not tolerate what I suspect I'll find here." He clenched his fist, and the armor compressed. Not enough to injure, but enough to pin the soldiers completely immobile. They could breathe, could see, but could not move a single centimeter. Magneto walked past them without another glance, deeper into the Star Destroyer. Following the magnetic signatures of power conduits and reactor cores, he needed answers about where and when he was. And he would take them from this ship's databanks, one way or another. Behind him, claxons began to wail throughout the adjudicator. The crew were beginning to understand. Something had boarded their ship that didn't play by any rules they understood. The adjudicator's corridors became a maze of twisted metal and sparking conduits as Magneto moved deeper into the vessel. Every step revealed more about this strange new reality he'd fallen into. The technology was familiar enough. Energy weapons, artificial gravity, faster-than-light travel. But the aesthetic was all wrong. Too clean, too uniform, too fascistic. He'd seen this before. Different uniforms, different language, different planet. Same diseased philosophy. A blast door slammed shut ahead of him. 20 centimeters of reinforced durasteel meant to contain hull breaches or boarding parties. Magneto didn't break stride. He simply extended his hand, feeling the metal's molecular structure through his mutant senses, and the door crumpled inward like aluminum foil. The shriek of tortured metal echoed through the corridor. Behind the door, a security team of 20 stormtroopers had established a defensive position with E-web heavy blasters and thermal detonators. Their squad leader had apparently learned from the last encounter. They'd stacked crates of non-metallic supplies as cover. "Contact! Open fire!" The E-web's rotating barrels spun up with a high-pitched whine, spewing dozens of blaster bolts per second. Magneto raised both hands and the air shimmered. The bolts struck an invisible barrier and dissipated, their energy bleeding away into nothing. He was generating a magnetic field dense enough to deflect particle-based weapons. "Fascinating," Magneto murmured. "Your weapons fire charged particles, not solid projectiles. Even easier to deflect." A stormtrooper hurled a thermal detonator. Magneto caught it mid-flight with a thought. Studying the spherical device as it blinked its countdown. 3 seconds. 2. 1. He compressed the detonator's metal casing, crushing the internal mechanism before it could achieve critical mass. The device died with a pathetic spark, falling to the deck as a twisted lump of scrap. "This is your last warning," Magneto said, his voice carrying clearly over the weapons fire. "Stand down, or I will make you stand down." The stormtrooper's response was another volley from the E-web. Magneto sighed. He'd given them a choice. They'd made it. With a gesture that had once torn the Golden Gate Bridge from its moorings, Magneto reached out to every piece of metal in the corridor. Blasters ripped from hands. The E-web tore free from its mounting, spinning end over end to embed itself in the far wall. And the stormtroopers themselves, their armor seized. Chest plates, helmets, boots, every component locked rigid. The troopers toppled like statues, unable to bend their joints, their armor transformed from protection into prison. They lay on the deck, helpless, while Magneto walked between them. He crouched beside one trooper, studying the white armor with professional interest. "Who do you serve?" he asked. "The Empire," the trooper gasped, his voice distorted by the helmet. "Long live Emperor Palpatine." "An Emperor!" Magneto's jaw tightened. "Of course. And what does your Emperor do with those he considers different? Those born with unusual abilities?" The trooper hesitated. "I don't—" Magneto touched the helmet's side, sensing the communication circuits within. With delicate precision, he activated them, overriding their encryption with electromagnetic manipulation. Voices flooded through. Panicked Imperial officers, damage reports, tactical chatter, and one word repeated over and over. "Inquisitors." "What are Inquisitors?" Magneto demanded. They hunt Force sensitives, the trooper admitted. Those who might become Jedi. The Emperor's orders. All Force users must be found and eliminated, Magneto finished coldly, or conscripted into your Empire's service. The trooper's silence was answer enough. Magneto stood, his expression hardening into something the trooper recognized despite never having seen it before. Righteous fury. I came to your galaxy by accident, Magneto said quietly. A dimensional anomaly, a cosmic mistake. I thought perhaps I would find a way home. Or at least a place to rest. He looked down at the paralyzed soldiers, at their identical armor, their faceless conformity. But I see now that I've merely traded one persecution for another, one empire for another. And I have spent my entire life fighting empires that hunt those who are different. His hands clenched into fists. That ends today. The trooper tried to respond, but Magneto was already walking away, heading toward what his magnetic senses identified as the ship's primary data core. He needed information, maps, history, the political structure of this galaxy. He needed to understand the battlefield before he could decide how to fight. But one thing was already certain. He would fight. Erik Lehnsherr had never learned how to do anything else. Behind him, the Imperial security team remained frozen in their armor, able only to watch as the stranger who bent metal with his thoughts disappeared deeper into their ship. They'd tried to stop him with weapons designed to kill. They hadn't realized they were fighting a man made of weapons themselves. The data core of the Adjudicator was a cathedral of information. Walls lined with memory banks that contained everything from Imperial operational protocols to star charts spanning 100,000 light-years. 2 technicians fled when Magneto tore the blast doors from their hinges. He let them go. They weren't his enemy. They were just cogs in a machine he was beginning to understand all too well. He approached the central console, studying the interface. Alien script, unfamiliar controls, but the underlying technology was straightforward enough. Magneto extended his consciousness into the machine itself, feeling the flow of electricity through circuits, the magnetic storage of data on physical drives. Information was just organized electrons, and electrons obeyed magnetism. His fingers didn't touch the console. They didn't need to. Data began flowing directly into the terminal's display, summoned by his manipulation of the ship's electronic systems. Star maps appeared first, a galaxy of unimaginable scope, thousands of inhabited systems, all connected by something called hyperspace lanes. Then came the history, the Republic, the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order. Magneto's eyes narrowed as he absorbed it all. An entire order of individuals born with extraordinary abilities, connected to something called the Force. For thousands of years, they'd been the galaxy's peacekeepers, its guardians. Then came Order 66. The footage was grainy, taken from clone trooper helmet cameras. Jedi cut down by their own soldiers, temples burning, children hunted through corridors. The Jedi younglings' faces flashed across the screen, their training sabers no match for blaster fire and betrayal. Magneto's hands trembled. The console began to spark as his emotional controls slipped, electricity arcing between circuits. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, to watch the rest. The Jedi Purge had been systematic, efficient, and nearly total. Survivors were hunted by Inquisitors, fallen Jedi twisted into instruments of the very Empire that had destroyed their order. And at the center of it all sat Emperor Palpatine, who'd orchestrated the Republic's transformation into a totalitarian regime. "Never again," Magneto whispered. "That's what we said. Never again." But it had happened again. Not to mutants this time, but to Force sensitives. Different galaxy, different name for those born different. Same hatred, same genocide. The ship lurched beneath him. Through his magnetic senses, Magneto felt the Adjudicator changing course, turning its weapons toward... He reached further, tasting the magnetic fields of the planet below. A settlement. capital city on Lothal. The Empire was preparing to bombard the city in response to his presence. Acceptable losses, collective punishment. He knew these tactics intimately. Magneto rose from the data terminal, his cape settling around his shoulders. The Star Destroyer's crew thought they could threaten innocents to force his surrender. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. Erik Lehnsherr had stopped being afraid of overwhelming force decades ago. He ascended through the ship, following corridors and turbo lifts with his magnetic senses until he reached an auxiliary hangar bay. TIE fighters sat in neat rows, their solar panel wings gleaming. Pilots scrambled toward their craft, following emergency launch protocols. "Stop!" Magneto commanded. The pilots froze. Not from obedience, but because their flight suits' metallic components suddenly locked rigid. They toppled like dominoes, unable to even break their falls. Magneto walked between the TIE fighters, feeling the pulse of their engines, the flow of power through their systems. Primitive compared to some technology he'd encountered, but elegant in their simplicity. And most importantly, almost entirely metal. He extended both hands, and 20 TIE fighters rose from the deck. On the bridge, Captain Veshek watched in horror as his hangar bay cameras showed the impossible. The fighters weren't launching, they were floating, spinning slowly in the air like leaves on a breeze. Then they began to compress, metal shrieking as invisible hands crumpled them into spheres of scrap. "Sir!" Oresco shouted. "He's in Hangar 7! Security teams are useless against him!" Veshek snapped. "Charge the forward batteries! Target capital city! If he wants to play hero, we'll show him the cost!" But Magneto was already moving. He'd felt the energy surge as the turbo-laser batteries powered up, felt the magnetic fields shifting as the massive weapons rotated toward the planet below. The Empire thought its arsenal made it invincible. They were about to learn the fatal flaw in that assumption. Every weapon they possessed was made of metal, and metal belonged to Magneto. He burst from the hangar bay, not in a ship, but surrounded by a sphere of debris he'd gathered. Hull plates, TIE fighter components, deck grating, all orbiting him in a protective shell. He flew through the vacuum toward the Star Destroyer's bow, toward the turbo-laser batteries that were even now preparing to fire on innocent civilians. The weapons never got the chance. Magneto reached out with his power, and the turbo-laser barrels twisted like taffy, bending back on themselves, their firing mechanisms warping into useless sculptures of tortured metal. One by one, across the entire length of the Star Destroyer's hull, every weapon died. "This is my answer," Magneto said, though no one could hear him in the vacuum. "To your threats, to your empire, to those who would murder children for being born different." He clenched both fists, and the adjudicator began to scream. The adjudicator was dying. Not quickly. Magneto didn't want to kill thousands of crew members who were, like the soldiers in concentration camps of his youth, just following orders. But he wanted the ship broken, crippled, unable to threaten anyone ever again. Structural supports groaned as he pulled them out of alignment. Power conduits severed, plunging entire sections into darkness. The massive ion engines sputtered and died as he twisted their magnetic containment fields into chaos. Within minutes, the Star Destroyer was little more than a floating hulk, life support failing, artificial gravity fluctuating wildly. Escape pods began launching like frightened birds, carrying crew toward the planet below. Magneto let them go. This wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message. He released his grip on the ship and flew toward Lothal's surface, the debris field around him dispersing as he descended through the atmosphere. Below, he could see Capital City, a sprawl of prefabricated Imperial architecture mixed with older, more organic structures. The contrast told a story. Conquerors building atop what they'd subjugated. Magneto landed in an empty plaza, his boots touching alien soil for the first time. Citizens scattered at his arrival, frightened by his dramatic entrance. He couldn't blame them. He'd just destroyed a Star Destroyer. They had no reason to believe he wasn't another threat. But before he could even consider his next move, the air shimmered above him. 3 ships decloaked. Smaller craft, sleeker than Imperial designs, painted in orange and white. They circled him cautiously. Weapons armed but not firing. A voice crackled from one ship's external speakers. "Unidentified individual, this is Phoenix Squadron of the Rebel Alliance. We've been monitoring Imperial transmissions. We know you just took down a Star Destroyer single-handedly." The voice was female, measured, military. "We'd like to talk." Magneto studied the ships. Rebel Alliance. So there was organized resistance to the Empire. That was something, at least. "I'm listening," he called up to them. "Not here. Not in the open. Meet us at—" The voice paused, apparently consulting with someone off-channel. "There's an old communications tower at bearing 173, 12 kilometers from your position. We'll be waiting." The ships re-engaged their cloaking devices and vanished. Magneto considered simply flying to the location, but decided against it. He'd made enough of a spectacle for one day. Instead, he walked, using the time to observe this new world. Lothal reminded him of industrial towns back on Earth. Working class, exploited, resources extracted for the benefit of distant powers. Imperial propaganda posters covered walls, declaring order and prosperity. The faces of citizens passing by told a different story. He saw a patrol of stormtroopers harassing a street vendor, overturning her cart for some petty regulation violation. Saw children with hungry eyes watching Imperial transports haul grain off-world. Saw the familiar architecture of oppression. Checkpoints, surveillance cameras, fear. Erik Lehnsherr had promised himself after escaping the camps that he would never again stand idle while others suffered. That promise had defined his life, for better and worse. It had made him a hero to some, a terrorist to others, but it had always made him act. The communications tower was abandoned, its equipment stripped by Imperial salvage teams. Magneto entered through a corroded doorway and found 5 people waiting inside. 4 humans, one older man with a beard and strange energy emanating from him, a green-skinned woman with pilot's gear, a young woman with dark hair and determined eyes, and a lean young man with shaggy hair. The 5th was a Lasat, a species Magneto recognized from the data he'd absorbed on the Star Destroyer. The bearded man stepped forward. His hand rested near a cylindrical device on his belt. A lightsaber, Magneto realized. A Jedi, or what passed for one now. "I'm Kanan Jarrus," the man said carefully. "These are my crew. Hera Syndulla, Sabine Wren, Ezra Bridger, and Garazeb Aurelios. We're part of a growing rebellion against the Galactic Empire." "Magneto," Erik replied simply. "Is that a name or a title?" the young one, Ezra, asked. "Both." Magneto's gaze fixed on Kanan. "You're a Jedi. I read about your order, about what happened to you." Kanan's expression darkened. "You've been busy. How did you—" "I have certain abilities," Magneto interrupted, "including the capacity to interface directly with electronic systems. I accessed the Star Destroyer's archives." He paused. "I'm sorry for what was done to your people. I understand persecution intimately." "Your power," Kanan said slowly. "It's not the Force. I can't sense you the way I sense other Force sensitives. What are you?" "I am a mutant," Magneto explained. "A human born with the ability to control magnetic fields and manipulate metal. Where I come from, people like me are hunted, feared, legislated against. We're called threats to normal society." His voice hardened. "So when I arrived in your galaxy and discovered that your empire hunts Force-sensitive children, that it committed genocide against the Jedi Order, let's just say I recognized the pattern." Hera exchanged glances with Kanan. "The enemy of our enemy," she said carefully. "Perhaps," Magneto replied. "Or perhaps I'm simply a man who's tired of watching empires murder children for being born different. Tell me about your rebellion." Hera Syndulla had recruited dozens of operatives for the rebellion. She'd convinced pirates to become freedom fighters, persuaded merchants to risk their livelihoods, inspired soldiers to defect from the Empire. She prided herself on reading people, on understanding what motivated them. But Magneto was different. He listened to her briefing on the rebellion's structure with the air of a general assessing a guerrilla force, respectful but not impressed. When she mentioned their recent victories against Imperial supply convoys, he nodded politely. When she explained their network of cells across the outer rim, he seemed almost disappointed. "You're fighting a war of pinpricks," Magneto said when she finished. "Stealing supplies, disrupting logistics, inspiring hope. Noble goals. But the Empire has 10,000 Star Destroyers. How many did you destroy last year?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. "We work with what we have," Kanan said, an edge in his voice. "Not all of us can tear apart capital ships with our minds." "No," Magneto agreed. "But you have something I don't. Knowledge of this galaxy, its politics, its power structures, and I have something you desperately need." He raised his hand, and every metallic object in the room lifted gently into the air. Blasters, Sabine's armor plates, tools, even the metal fibers in their clothing. "I have the ability to make the Empire's greatest strength into its fatal weakness." Ezra stared as his lightsaber hilt floated past his face. "Okay, that's incredibly unsettling." Magneto lowered his hand, and everything settled back into place. "Your Empire builds with metal. Ships, weapons, armor, infrastructure, all vulnerable to someone who can manipulate it at the molecular level. But power without purpose is just destruction. I need to understand what I'm fighting for before I commit to fighting alongside you." "What do you want to know?" Hera asked. "Everything you didn't mention in your recruitment speech," Magneto said. "The rebellion's actual goals. What happens if you win? Who leads? What kind of government replaces the Empire?" He looked at each of them in turn. "I've seen too many revolutions become the very thing they fought against. Convince me yours will be different." Kanan opened his mouth, then closed it. The question had caught him off guard. "We want to restore the Republic," Hera said finally. "Democracy, rule of law, freedom for all systems to govern themselves." "The same Republic that became the Empire?" Magneto asked. "The same democracy that allowed a Sith Lord to orchestrate a galaxy-wide war and seize absolute power without anyone noticing until it was too late?" "That's not fair," Sabine interjected. "The Republic was betrayed. Every failed democracy claims betrayal." Magneto cut her off, though not unkindly. "The truth is usually more complex. Systems don't collapse from external pressure alone. They rot from within. Corruption, complacency, the slow erosion of principles." He turned back to Hera. "I'm not saying don't fight the Empire. I'm saying understand why you're fighting and what you're building in its place." Zeb crossed his massive arms. "You talk like someone who's lost before." "I have," Magneto admitted. "Many times. I've fought for mutant rights, for recognition, for survival. I've allied with heroes and villains both, depending on who would help my people. And I've learned that good intentions aren't enough. You need vision, strategy, and the will to make hard choices. And you think we don't have that?" Kanan's hand drifted toward his lightsaber. "I think you're brave, principled, and outmatched," Magneto said bluntly. "The Empire controls the galactic core, commands millions of soldiers, and has weapons that can destroy entire planets. Your cell operates one ship and conducts raids on backwater worlds. The math is unfavorable." "So, what do you suggest?" Hera asked, her voice tight. "That we give up?" "I suggest you think bigger," Magneto said. "Stop fighting like insurgents and start fighting like liberators. The Empire's power comes from fear and infrastructure. Break the infrastructure. Shatter the fear." He gestured toward the tower's viewport, toward the sky where the crippled adjudicator was now a visible speck, escape pods still falling like rain. I disabled that Star Destroyer in under an hour. Imagine what I could do to Imperial facilities across Lothal, across the sector. Ezra's eyes lit up. You could take apart their whole garrison. No, Kanan interrupted. We don't know you. You show up, destroy an Imperial ship, and now want to lead some kind of campaign? For all we know, you're using us to clear your own path to power. Magneto met Kanan's gaze steadily. You're right to be suspicious. In your position, I would be too. So let me be clear. I don't want to rule your galaxy. I don't even want to stay here. I want to return to my own universe, to my own fight. His voice dropped. But while I'm here, while I'm trapped in a galaxy where empires hunt children for being born different, I will not stand idle. With you or without you. The tower fell silent except for the wind whistling through broken equipment. Hera looked at Kanan, some wordless communication passing between them. Finally, she spoke. There's an Imperial facility on Lothal. They're building new TIE fighter prototypes. If what you say is true about your abilities, show me, Magneto said. The Imperial factory sprawled across Lothal's industrial sector like a mechanical cancer, all gray durasteel and smoke-belching chimneys. From their vantage point on a ridge 2 kilometers distant, Magneto studied the facility through a pair of electro-binoculars Sabine had provided. Perimeter has walker patrols every 20 minutes, Sabine explained, pulling up a holographic schematic from her datapad. ATDP scouts, mostly. Guard towers at each corner with E-web positions. Interior has approximately 200 stormtroopers, plus factory workers. Civilians pressed into Imperial service. How many civilians? Magneto asked. Reports say about 500, Hera answered. Engineers, assembly technicians, maintenance crews. Most are locals who didn't have a choice. Work for the Empire or starve. Magneto lowered the electro-binoculars, his jaw tight. Collateral damage was something he'd wrestled with his entire life. The line between acceptable losses and mass murder was one he'd crossed and recrossed, always with consequences that haunted him. We need to evacuate them before any action, he said. Impossible, Kanan replied. Imperial security protocols keep workers inside during shifts. Sealed blast doors, identification checkpoints. Even if we could get them out, the Empire would execute them for complicity. Then we make it look like an accident, Magneto said. Something that gives them plausible deniability. He pointed at the factory's main power distribution node, a towering structure that fed energy to the entire complex. If that were to catastrophically fail, say, its magnetic containment system suddenly malfunctioned, it would trigger an evacuation protocol, yes? Ezra grinned. I like how this guy thinks. It's risky, Hera said. If you can't control the failure precisely. I can, Magneto interrupted. I've manipulated magnetic fields since I was a child and... He stopped himself. They didn't need to know about Auschwitz. Not yet. I've had decades of practice. Trust me. Kanan studied him with those Force-sensitive eyes, as if trying to peer past the helmet and into Erik's soul. Why do you wear that helmet? He asked suddenly. It blocks telepathic intrusion, Magneto replied. Where I come from, there are those who can read minds, control thoughts. I learned early that privacy of mind is the last freedom no one should be able to take. He paused. I assume your Force can do similar things? Some Jedi could, Kanan admitted. Mind tricks, reading surface thoughts. But we were taught to use those abilities sparingly, with consent. And the Sith? No such restraints. Magneto nodded. Then the helmet stays on. They approached the factory after nightfall, using the Ghost's cloaking device to insert close to the perimeter. Magneto went first, walking openly toward the main gate while the others circled to secondary positions. He wanted attention on him, not them. The gate guard spotted him immediately. "Halt! Identify yourself!" Magneto raised both hands in a gesture that might have been surrender. "I'm the one who destroyed the adjudicator this morning. I've come to discuss terms." The guards froze for precisely 2 seconds. Then alarm shrieked across the facility. Blast doors slammed shut. Walker patrols converged on his position. It was almost textbook Imperial response. Overwhelming force, no negotiation. 3 ATDP walkers rounded the corner, their pilots clearly hoping to crush this threat before it became another headline. Their forward-mounted blaster cannons opened fire simultaneously. Magneto didn't move. The bolts simply stopped, hanging in the air like frozen fireflies. With a casual gesture, he redirected them into the ground, scoring black marks across the permacrete. Then he reached out to the walkers themselves. The machines were elegant in their simplicity. Gyroscopic stabilization, hydraulic joints, reinforced armor plating, all metal, all his to command. The lead walker suddenly lurched sideways, its legs moving against its pilot's commands. The pilot's frantic attempts to override his controls were useless. You couldn't override magnetism with a control stick. Magneto brought the walker down gently, laying it on its side like a sleeping animal. The pilot scrambled out of the cockpit hatch, running for his life. The other 2 walkers tried to compensate, backing away, but Magneto was already inside their systems. Within seconds, all 3 lay disabled, their pilots evacuating in panic. "Attention Imperial personnel!" Magneto's voice boomed across the facility, amplified by his manipulation of the factory's own PA system. "Your power grid is about to experience catastrophic failure. Evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." On cue, he reached out to the main power distribution node. He could feel the energy flowing through it, the magnetic bottles that contained the reactor's output. With surgical precision, he began destabilizing them. Not enough to cause an explosion, just enough to trigger every safety protocol simultaneously. Klaxons wailed. Emergency lighting bathed the factory in red, and the civilians inside, blessed their survival instincts, began running for the exits. Stormtroopers tried to maintain order, but even Imperial discipline crumbled when the building itself seemed to be tearing apart. Magneto was pulling panels from walls, collapsing non-critical support beams, creating the impression of imminent structural failure without actually endangering anyone. "Now," Hera's voice crackled over the comlink. "Main production floor is clear." Magneto flew up to the factory's roof, tore open an access hatch, and descended into the heart of the facility. Rows of TIE fighter frames hung from assembly lines, half-constructed instruments of Imperial power. They were beautiful in their way. Elegant killing machines. He destroyed them all. Metal screamed as Magneto compressed 20 TIE fighter frames into a single sphere of scrap the size of a land speeder. Sparks cascaded like waterfalls as hull plates fused together. Solar panel arrays crumpled into foil, and ion engine housings collapsed inward. What had taken hundreds of workers' weeks to assemble took him seconds to unmake. He moved through the production floor like a force of nature, methodically destroying the Empire's investment. Assembly line machinery twisted into abstract sculptures. Component storage racks folded like paper. Even the Durasteel support beams groaned as he selectively weakened their structural integrity. Not enough to collapse the building, but enough to condemn it beyond repair. Outside, Sabine watched through her helmet's rangefinder as Imperial forces tried to regroup. "He's not even trying to hide what he's doing," she said, awe tinging her voice. "He wants them to see it." "Psychological warfare," Kanan murmured. "He's not just destroying the factory. He's destroying their confidence, making them feel helpless." "Is that wrong?" Ezra asked. Kanan didn't answer immediately. The Jedi way preached compassion even for enemies, minimizing harm, seeking peaceful resolution. But watching Magneto dismantle an Imperial war machine with such casual ease, Kanan felt something he rarely allowed himself: satisfaction. The Empire had hunted his people to near extinction. Watching someone make them feel powerless was complicated. "Master?" Ezra pressed. "Stay focused," Kanan said. "Cover his exit." But Magneto didn't need an exit. When he emerged from the factory's main entrance, walking through smoke and sparking electrical fires, he found a full platoon of stormtroopers waiting. Behind them, an AT-AT walker had been deployed, the massive four-legged siege weapon that had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. The AT-AT's commander clearly believed overwhelming firepower was the answer. The walker's heavy laser cannons tracked Magneto's position, building enough charge to vaporize a bunker. The stormtroopers raised their rifles in perfect formation. "Last chance to surrender!" A voice boomed from the AT-AT's external speakers. Magneto stopped walking. He tilted his head, studying the walker with professional interest. It was massive, easily 20 meters tall, armored enough to shrug off conventional weapons. A symbol of Imperial might. Also, entirely made of metal.
"I've fought Sentinels 3 times this size," Magneto said quietly. Then he raised both hands. The AT-8 lurched. Its front left leg buckled as Magneto twisted the internal support struts, compromising the joint's integrity. The walker tried to compensate, shifting weight to its other legs, but Magneto was already moving to the next joint, and the next. Within seconds, the massive machine was wobbling like a newborn animal trying to stand. The pilot fired anyway, desperation overriding sense. Turbo laser bolts lanced toward Magneto and curved away, redirected by magnetic fields dense enough to bend light itself. The shots carved into the ground 50 meters away, throwing up geysers of dirt. Magneto clenched his fists, and the AT-AT's legs collapsed entirely. The walker toppled with the slow inevitability of a falling building, crashing onto its side with an impact that shook the ground. Emergency hatches blew open, and the crew scrambled out, running from the fallen Titan. The stormtroopers broke. Not a tactical retreat, a rout. They'd been trained to face overwhelming odds, to hold positions against impossible enemy numbers. But training couldn't prepare them for an enemy who treated their armor and weapons as liabilities rather than assets. Magneto watched them flee, feeling the familiar weight of his choices. He hadn't killed anyone today, hadn't even seriously injured Imperial personnel, but he'd broken their will, shattered their confidence in the technology they relied on. Was that mercy, or merely a different kind of cruelty? "Target neutralized," Hera's voice came through his borrowed comlink. "Imperial reinforcements are en route from Capital City. We need to extract." Magneto took one last look at the ruined factory, the disabled walker, the scattered Imperial forces. A message had been sent. Whether the Empire would learn from it or simply escalate remained to be seen. He flew toward the Ghost's landing coordinates, debris swirling around him like a personal honor guard of scrap metal. The crew was already aboard, engines hot, ramp descending just long enough for him to land inside before Hera punched the throttles. As the ship climbed toward orbit, Sabine turned to face him. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," she said. "And also the most terrifying." "Good," Magneto replied, removing his helmet and running a hand through gray hair. His face was lined with exhaustion, not from physical exertion, but from the weight of what he'd done. Terror is a tool. The Empire has used it against the galaxy for decades, time they experienced it themselves. "The Empire won't take this lying down," Kanan warned. "You've embarrassed them. They'll send more than stormtroopers next time." "I'm counting on it," Magneto said. "Your rebellion fights in shadows because you can't win open confrontations. But I can. Let them send their Star Destroyers, their walkers, their armies. Every weapon they deploy against me is one fewer threatening civilians." "That's not a strategy," Hera said. "That's martyrdom." "No," Magneto corrected. "It's a demonstration. You want systems to join the rebellion? Show them the Empire can be beaten, not in ambushes and raids, but in direct combat. Show them that Imperial might isn't inevitable."
Ezra leaned forward. You really think you can take on the whole Empire? Magneto met the young man's eyes. I've spent my life fighting impossible odds. I'm still here. The ghost jumped to hyperspace, leaving Lothal and its burning Imperial facility behind. In the common area, Magneto accepted a cup of what Hera called kaf. Bitter, hot, and almost familiar enough to be coffee. He sat across from Kanan, who'd been quietly observing him since their departure. You're waiting for me to tell you my story, Magneto said without preamble. Kanan raised an eyebrow. Am I that obvious? You're a Jedi. Your kind always want to understand people's motivations, to sense their true nature. Magneto sipped the kaf. But my helmet blocks the Force, so you're forced to simply ask. It's making you uncomfortable. You know a lot about Jedi for someone from another universe. I had time to read on that Star Destroyer, Magneto said. Your order fascinated me. An entire civilization of gifted individuals, working to maintain peace. His expression darkened. And then hunted to extinction by the very government they served. It's a familiar pattern. Your people, mutants, they faced something similar. Magneto was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his cup and removed his helmet completely, letting Kanan see his face without barriers. I was born in Germany in 1920. When I was a child, a government came to power that believed some humans were superior to others. They believed those who were different, Jews, Romani, disabled, anyone who didn't fit their ideal, should be eliminated. Kanan's expression shifted. You were in those camps? The ones in the historical records? Auschwitz, Magneto confirmed. I watched my mother die in a gas chamber. My sister shot trying to escape. My father worked to death in labor details. His hands clenched. I survived because I was useful. Because my mutant power manifested early, and a Nazi doctor named Schmidt found it interesting. The common area had gone silent. The rest of the crew had gathered near the doorway, listening. When the camps were liberated, I thought the nightmare was over, Magneto continued. That humanity had learned from its darkest moment. That never again meant something. He laughed bitterly. I was naive. Within a generation, new threats emerged. Sentinels, massive robots designed to hunt and kill mutants. Registration acts demanding we reveal ourselves to the government. Cure programs that treated our gifts as diseases to be eliminated. So, you fought back, Hera said quietly. I did more than fight back. I tried to build a nation, Genosha, an island sanctuary where mutants could live free from persecution. The humans bombed it. 16 million mutants died in a single day. His voice cracked slightly. 16 million. I couldn't save them, couldn't protect them. All my power, all my preparation, and I failed. Sabine stepped forward. That's why you reacted so strongly to learning about the Jedi Purge. You saw your own tragedy reflected. History repeating across universes, Magneto agreed. Different names, different powers, same hatred, same fear of those born different. He looked at each of them in turn. I've made mistakes, terrible ones. I've killed in the name of protection, terrorized in the name of liberation. Crossed lines I swore I'd never cross. But I've never stood by while children were hunted. Ezra shifted uncomfortably. The Inquisitors hunt Force-sensitive kids. Try to turn them or kill them if they can't. I know, Magneto said. I read the reports. Which brings me to a question. Where are the children you've saved? Where do Force-sensitive refugees go? Kanan and Hera exchanged glances. There are safe houses, Kanan said carefully. Hidden locations scattered across the outer rim, but resources are limited. We can't protect everyone. Then we need to do better, Magneto said. Your rebellion focuses on military targets, propaganda, inspiring hope. All valid. But if you want my help, truly want it, then we're going to expand the mission. Every Force-sensitive child we find gets protected. Every Inquisitor who hunts them gets stopped, permanently, if necessary. That's a declaration of war against the Empire's entire Force user hunting apparatus, Hera said. It'll bring Vader down on us. Good, Magneto replied. I've been meaning to meet him. Any Jedi who willingly serves the regime that destroyed his order is either a coward or a monster. Either way, he needs to be stopped. You don't understand, Kanan said urgently. Vader isn't just powerful. He's unstoppable. He's killed more Jedi than anyone in history. Going after him directly is suicide. For a Force user, perhaps, Magneto acknowledged. But I don't use the Force. I use magnetism. And unless I'm mistaken, Vader wears armor. Metal armor. With metal components keeping him alive. He smiled coldly. I've toppled governments, Kanan. Fought gods and won. One man in a suit, no matter how powerful, is just another obstacle. Zeb let out a low whistle. This guy's either the bravest person I've ever met, or the craziest. Both, Magneto said. Usually both. Hera stood, pacing. If we do this, and that's a huge if, we need intelligence, locations of Inquisitor bases, transport schedules for captured Force sensitives. The Empire guards that information carefully. Then we'll take it from them, Magneto said. There's an Imperial intelligence facility on... He paused, pulling up the star charts he'd memorized. On Coruscant, the capital. Where better to strike at the heart of their operation? Coruscant is impossible, Sabine said flatly. Most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. Millions of stormtroopers. Entire fleets in orbit. All the more reason to go, Magneto countered. The debate raged for hours. Kanan argued caution. Hera stressed logistics. Sabine ran probability calculations that all came back grim. Even Zeb, who enjoyed a good fight, thought infiltrating Coruscant was pushing their luck beyond breaking. But Ezra surprised them all. We should do it, the young man said during a lull in the argument. Not the full-scale assault Magneto's suggesting, but something. We've been running and hiding for so long we've forgotten what it's like to actually hurt the Empire where it matters. Ezra, Kanan began. No, listen. Every day we wait, more kids are captured. More Force sensitives are turned into Inquisitors or killed. If Magneto can really do what he says, if he can actually make the Empire's technology work against them, then we have to try. Otherwise, what are we even fighting for? Silence fell across the common area. Out of the mouths of children, Magneto thought. The boy understood what the adults were too cautious to embrace. Sometimes you had to risk everything to change anything. A compromise, Hera said finally. We don't hit Coruscant. Not yet. But there's an Imperial black site on Stygian Prime, a prison called the Spire. They hold captured Jedi there before transferring them for Inquisitor conversion. She pulled up a holographic image of a tower jutting from a volcanic planet. If we could break them out, we'd save lives and gain intelligence, Magneto finished. Prisoners often know things their captors think they've forgotten. It's a sound tactical objective. Kanan studied the hologram, his expression troubled. The Spire isn't just guarded, it's designed to hold Force users. Cortosis walls that resist lightsabers. Isalamiri that create Force null bubbles. Automated defense systems. Cortosis doesn't stop magnetism, Magneto pointed out. And automated systems run on electronics I can manipulate. What about these Isalamiri? Creatures that push back the Force in a radius around them, Kanan explained. They make Force users powerless. Then it's fortunate I don't rely on the Force, Magneto said. How soon can we leave? You're that eager to charge into an Imperial stronghold? Sabine asked. I'm that eager to stop debating and start acting, Magneto corrected. Every moment we spend planning is another moment those prisoners suffer. I've been in cells before. I know what it does to a person's soul. The Ghost set course for Stygian Prime, a 3-day journey through hyperspace. Magneto used the time to study the crew, learning how they work together. Hera was the heart, steady, tactical, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Kanan was the conscience, tempering action with wisdom even when it frustrated him. Sabine was the artist, finding creative solutions where others saw only obstacles. Ezra was raw potential, powerful but undisciplined. And Zeb was the muscle with a surprisingly strategic mind. They were good people. Magneto had fought alongside worse. On the second day, Ezra approached him in the cargo hold where Magneto had been meditating. Not a forced meditation, but the mental exercises he'd developed to maintain fine control over his powers. "Can I ask you something?" the boy said. "You just did." Ezra grinned. "Okay. Can I ask you something else? Back on Lothal. When you disabled those walkers and took apart the factory, you could have killed those Imperials easily. But you didn't. Why not?" Magneto opened his eyes. "Because I've killed enough people to know that death should never be casual. Those soldiers, they're not inherently evil. They're cogs in a machine, following orders, believing they serve order and stability. Some are true believers. Others are just trying to survive in a galaxy that offers few choices. But they serve the Empire. They hunt people like us." "Yes," Magneto agreed. "And when they become threats that can only be stopped with lethal force, I won't hesitate. But I won't kill unnecessarily. That path..." He paused, memories of Genosha's aftermath flooding back. "That path leads to becoming the monster you're fighting against." "Kanan says similar things," Ezra said. "About the dark side. That using anger and hatred, even for good reasons, corrupts you." "Your master is wise," Magneto said. "Though I'd argue that righteous anger has its place. The key is controlling it rather than letting it control you. I've failed at that more times than I care to admit." "But you keep trying. What else can I do?" Magneto stood, stretching muscles that had been still too long. "Give up? Let evil triumph? I'm too old and too stubborn for that. Besides," he managed a slight smile, "someone has to show young idealists like you how to actually win." Ezra laughed. "I think you and Kanan are going to drive each other crazy." "Probably," Magneto agreed. "But if we're lucky, we'll all survive long enough for it to matter." When they dropped out of hyperspace at Stygian Prime, the planet was exactly as forbidding as the holo images suggested. Volcanic, hostile, wrapped in toxic clouds, and rising from its hellish surface like an obsidian knife, the Spire. "Sensor sweep shows heavy defenses," Hera reported. "TIE fighter patrols, surface-to-air batteries, energy shields over the main structure." Magneto studied the fortress, his magnetic senses reaching out. "The shields run on generators. The batteries are mounted on metallic rails. The TIE fighters are..." He smiled grimly. "Well, we know what I can do to TIE fighters." "So what's the play?" Zeb asked. "Aggressive negotiation," Magneto said, heading for the cargo ramp. Magneto descended toward the Spire alone, surrounded by a protective sphere of debris he'd pulled from the Ghost's storage. Spare hull plates, tool crates, anything metallic. The TIE fighter patrol spotted him immediately, their pilots radioing for instructions before opening fire. He didn't give them the chance. With a sweeping gesture, all 6 TIE fighters seized in mid-flight, their controls going dead as he took command of their systems. The pilots' frantic attempts to restart engines were futile. Magneto simply held them there, suspended in the air like insects in amber, while he continued his descent. "Attention, Spire Command!" he broadcasted on all Imperial frequencies. "I am here for your prisoners. Surrender them peacefully, and your facility remains intact. Resist, and I will tear this tower down stone by stone until I find them myself." The response was predictable. Surface-to-air batteries erupted in coordinated fire, turbo laser bolts converging on his position from a dozen angles. Magneto erected a magnetic field that bent the shots away, sending them spiraling harmlessly into the volcanic landscape below. The air shimmered with redirected energy. "Your choice," Magneto said, and reached out to the tower itself. The spire had stood for decades, a monument to Imperial power and a tomb for captured Jedi. Its cortosis-infused walls were supposed to be impregnable, designed to contain Force users and resist lightsaber strikes. But cortosis was still an alloy, still metal, and metal belonged to Magneto. He started with the weapon batteries, twisting their barrels into useless sculptures. Then the external sensors, crushing them like tin cans. The communications array folded in on itself, cutting the facility off from Imperial reinforcements. And finally, the blast doors, 20 centimeters of reinforced durasteel, which peeled away like flower petals opening to the sun. Inside the spire, alarms screamed. Warden Tua, a thin woman whose cruelty had kept her in this posting for years, stared at her security monitors in disbelief as every defensive system failed simultaneously. The prisoner cells, designed to be escape-proof, were opening on their own, magnetic locks disengaging without authorization. "Seal the lower levels!" she screamed at her officers. "Deploy all security teams! Contact!" The communications console exploded in sparks. Through the warden's viewport, she saw him, the figure in the crimson cape, floating impossibly in the toxic atmosphere, surrounded by a cyclone of twisted metal that had once been Imperial weaponry. Magneto entered through the breach he'd created, landing in a corridor where a dozen stormtroopers waited. They'd learned from Lothal's reports. These troopers carried slug-thrower rifles, projectile weapons that couldn't be deflected by magnetic fields. They fired. The bullets stopped a meter from Magneto's body, hanging motionless. With a flick of his wrist, he sent them clattering harmlessly to the floor. "Clever," he acknowledged, "but bullets are still metal." The troopers' armor seized, locking their joints. They toppled like dominoes. Magneto moved deeper into the spire, following the cellular structure toward the maximum security wing. He passed automated turrets that swiveled to track him but never fired. Their targeting systems corrupted by electromagnetic interference he generated passively. Blast doors opened at his approach, their security protocols overridden by his direct manipulation of their electronic components. In the detention level, he found them. 23 prisoners, most wearing tattered robes that had once been Jedi vestments. Some were human, others alien species he didn't recognize. All bore the haunted expressions of people who'd lost hope. A Togruta woman looked up as Magneto approached her cell. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who understands what it's like to be hunted for being different," Magneto replied. The cell door's magnetic lock disengaged with a thought. "Come, all of you. You're free." "This is a trick," an older man said, his voice hoarse. "The Inquisitors. They like to offer false hope, to break us." Magneto met his eyes. "I am not an Inquisitor. I am not even from this galaxy. But I know persecution when I see it, and I know that leaving you here would make me complicit in your suffering. Now move before Imperial reinforcements arrive." As if summoned by his words, a new presence entered the spire. Magneto felt it before he saw it. A disturbance in the electromagnetic fields, accompanied by the mechanical sound of breathing. The prisoners recoiled in terror. "Vader!" the Togruta woman breathed. Through the corridor strode a figure clad entirely in black armor, a crimson lightsaber igniting in his hand. The Dark Lord of the Sith had arrived, drawn by reports of the Spire's assault. His presence radiated menace, the dark side of the Force rolling off him like heat from a furnace. "You have made a grave error coming here," Vader's mechanized voice intoned. "I am Lord Vader, and you will not leave this place alive." Magneto stepped between the Dark Lord and the prisoners, his cape settling around his shoulders. "Lord Vader, I've been hoping to meet you. I have questions about how a Jedi becomes a servant of the regime that destroyed his order." Vader's helmet tilted slightly. "You know nothing of the Force, nothing of power. You are merely another rebel who will be crushed." "Perhaps," Magneto allowed. "Or perhaps you'll discover that the Force isn't the only power in this galaxy." He raised both hands. "Shall we find out?" The corridor exploded into violence. Vader launched forward with Force-enhanced speed, his lightsaber a crimson blur aimed at Magneto's chest. But Erik had fought speedsters before, beings who moved faster than human perception. He didn't need to see Vader move. He needed to feel the metal. The Dark Lord's armor was a masterwork of Imperial engineering, durasteel plating, respiratory systems, cybernetic limbs, all keeping the broken man inside alive, and all composed of metal that sang to Magneto's senses like a symphony. Vader's strike stopped mid-swing, his entire body seized in invisible hands. The lightsaber trembled, still ignited, but unable to move forward. Behind his mask, Vader's breathing intensified, sharp mechanical gasps of surprise and effort. "Your suit keeps you alive," Magneto said calmly. "Every breath you take flows through machinery I control. Every step you take is on cybernetic limbs that answer to me now." He gestured, and Vader's arm moved against his will, the lightsaber deactivating and clattering to the floor. Vader released a massive force push, raw telekinetic power that cracked the walls and sent debris flying. Magneto's magnetic shield absorbed most of it, though the sheer pressure drove him back several steps. The Dark Lord was powerful, perhaps more powerful than any Force user he'd read about. But power had limits, and Vader's limit was his dependence on the very technology Magneto commanded. "We're leaving," Magneto said, backing toward the prisoners while keeping his focus on Vader. "Tell your Emperor that the Jedi aren't as extinct as he believes. And tell him that there are powers in this galaxy that don't bow to the Force." He released Vader suddenly, then tore a massive section of wall free, sending tons of metal crashing between them. By the time Vader cleared the obstacle with the Force, Magneto and all 23 prisoners were gone, floating through the breach he'd created in the spire's outer wall. The Ghost swooped in, ramp extended. Hera's piloting was flawless as she matched velocity with the floating mass of freed prisoners. They pulled everyone aboard, and the ship banked hard, accelerating away from Stygian Prime as TIE fighters scrambled in pursuit. But Magneto stood at the open ramp, and every pursuing fighter found its controls unresponsive, its weapons dead. One by one, they fell away, unable to chase. Inside the Ghost, the freed Jedi stared at their rescuer with a mixture of awe and confusion. The Togruta woman approached Magneto carefully. "You challenged Vader and survived. No one does that." "I had an advantage," Magneto replied, finally showing the exhaustion he felt. "Your empire builds its power on technology. Technology can be turned against them." Kanan stepped forward, his expression complex. "What you did back there, holding Vader helpless, that was necessary," Magneto finished. "He would have killed you all. Sometimes mercy means showing strength, not restraint." As the Ghost jumped to hyperspace, carrying its cargo of liberated prisoners to safety, Magneto looked out at the stars streaking past. This wasn't his galaxy. These weren't his people. But the fight was the same fight he'd waged his entire life, protecting those who were hunted for being different. In the command center of the spire, Vader stood among the wreckage, his respirator heaving with suppressed rage. The prisoners were gone. The facility was in ruins. And for the first time since his transformation, he had been helpless, rendered powerless not by the Force, but by simple magnetism. He would remember this, and he would ensure the Emperor understood. A new threat had emerged, one that their power could not easily counter. The galaxy had changed, and Erik Lehnsherr had just declared war on the Empire. In the days that followed the Spire raid, Magneto's name spread across Imperial channels like wildfire. Holovids of a caped figure dismantling Star Destroyers, crushing AT-ATs, and holding Darth Vader himself at bay became the most suppressed and most widely distributed content in the galaxy. The Empire called him a terrorist. The rebellion whispered that he was hope incarnate. Both were partially right. Erik Lehnsherr had not asked to be transported to this galaxy far, far away. He had not sought to become a symbol of resistance against yet another fascist regime. But fate, the Force, or simple cosmic irony had placed him exactly where his particular gifts were most needed. In a galaxy where mystical energy dictated the balance of power, he represented something the Empire had never encountered, a force entirely outside their understanding. The freed Jedi established a hidden enclave, protected by Magneto's power and the Rebellion's network. Force-sensitive children began finding their way to safety, guided by whispers of a man who could make the Empire's weapons useless. The Inquisitors found their hunts increasingly difficult as their targets simply vanished, extracted by someone who treated their technology like toys. Magneto had learned something important in this strange new reality. The Force was not the only power that mattered. Compassion, technology, and the will to stand against oppression, these too could change the course of history. He had found allies in Kanan, Hera, and the Ghost Crew. He had found purpose in protecting those the Empire hunted. And he had found that some fights transcended universes. The Empire would come for him. Vader would seek revenge. Emperor Palpatine himself might eventually take notice of this anomaly that disrupted his carefully laid plans. But Erik Lehnsherr had faced gods, fought armies, and survived genocides. He had toppled governments and built nations. One more empire, no matter how vast, was just another obstacle. As he stood on the Ghost's observation deck, watching hyperspace stream past, Magneto allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Somewhere in the multiverse, his own fight continued without him. Charles Xavier was likely searching for him. The X-Men would wonder where he'd gone. But for now, in this galaxy that needed him just as desperately as his own, Erik Lehnsherr had found his purpose again. The Master of Magnetism had become the galaxy's unexpected liberator. And the Force itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen when an unstoppable will met an immovable empire. The Rebellion had gained its most powerful weapon. The Empire had discovered its greatest vulnerability. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the real war was only beginning.